Hey guys, so welcome to tonight's discussion of hood feminism. Tonight we are going to be covering four sections: missing and murdered, fear and feminism, race, poverty and politics, and education. We previously had the first discussions on hood feminism to discuss the previous chapter. So if you haven't already checked those out, make sure you go and check them out. They are in the Smart Brown Girls Book Club Facebook group. Also purchase the syllabus because it's really helpful as you're reading the book, and it's also extremely helpful for these discussions. I'll be using some of the questions in the syllabus to guide us tonight. Again, we're going to be going over hood feminism. The chapter is missing and murdered, fear and feminism, race, poverty, and politics, and education. So welcome to everyone. We have a minute, but I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. So the first chapter of this section that we're going to be going over tonight, missing and murdered. I think out of the sections that we are discussing tonight, this was probably the one that I enjoyed reading the most. So Megyn Kelly starts this section off by talking about missing white woman syndrome, which is something that I'm sure we're all familiar with. White women go missing, and it's world stop immediately until this white woman is found. Everything must pause. But despite the influx and the large number of black girls and women that are going missing every single day, there is not the same response. So Mickey outlines basically the culture and the history behind this phenomenon in this chapter, and she does so again by stating that the missing white woman syndrome is, quote, a phenomenon where media coverage of white women who have gone missing blankets the airways, sometimes on and off for decades. That's on page 148 for those with the physical copy of the book. I also have the ebook, so I'm not going to give my pages just because it'll probably be off for most people. But as far as the missing white woman, or we can even say missing white girl syndrome goes, we can think of cases like JonBenet Ramsey. We are still getting Netflix videos and films about JonBenet, and I can't remember, I don't know what year that was when she went missing, but we are still getting those films to this day. And we're also hearing about Natalie Holloway, the teenager who went missing, I think, on her senior trip to Aruba. So this isn't some far-fetched or rare idea. White women go missing, and time again, we are forced to see these stories cover up the stories of black women and girls who go missing. There are hashtags, and the only way that black women and girls get their just due in the media is through social media, when other black women or the black community, but mainly black women, rally behind them on Twitter. We create hashtags. There was hashtag bring back our girls, or there'll be a hashtag in support of a specific case. So find, whoever the case may be. But rarely do we see, I'll say never do we see the same level of intensity and dedication to finding missing black girls. I know that while it wasn't a long-term search, but look, Kanika Jenkins' story. Kanika Jenkins went missing in the hotel. Her body was quickly found downstairs in the freezer, but just the ambiguity and the mystery that surrounded that case, it was kind of like, okay, why isn't there a higher sense of urgency in finding this missing black girl? And I like how, give me a second, I'm pulling up my book on my phone, but there was a section in the book where, in this particular chapter, I want to read the direct quote, but she says, again, I'm not going to give my pages, just because I have the ebook, so I think that it'll be off for people. I know a lot of people ordered the physical copy. But she notes in this chapter that right now in Chicago, there are clusters of murdered Black and brown women whose bodies have been found since 2001, and their murders are largely going unsolved. Chicago police have insisted that there is no evidence of a serial killer in action. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That there is a serial killer in action, though in a city with a police murder clearance rate of only 25%, it's difficult to assess how much work has been done to solve these crimes. Murder clearance rates are down around the country, with the national average of 59%, but Chicago's is among the lowest in the country. Even though the Chicago Police Department has admitted that there might be an active serial killer on the loose after 2 decades and more than 50 deaths after so many years, what are the chances that these crimes can be solved? So, here Kendall is giving us the actual statistics of these crimes in Chicago specifically. But I think that this can be attributed to cases across the country. And I know in the case of Bring Back Our Girls, it was a global phenomenon. There was the incident with Boko Haram and I think 200, I might be off with the number, but there was a large number of Black girls that went missing. And it was kind of like, okay, who's trying to find these girls? We had Michelle Obama making statements and various Black women with platforms on social media making large statements, but there was not enough rallying around actually finding these girls. And all too often we see these social media movements stay stagnant and only remain on social media. There is no police intervention or FBI aid, when JonBenet Ramsey or Natalie Holloway or insert any other white woman's name here goes missing. There is, we send the dogs out. We have to find them immediately. So she also is mentioning here, if you refer to your syllabus, like 200 plus girls with Boko Haram. She mentions in the missing and murdered section of the syllabus, there's a question that's posed that I want y'all to answer in the comments just to kind of keep us on track. But how has the responsibility of Black women's safety been placed first and foremost on ourselves? And why is the lack of data and documentation on missing women at multiple margins and axes of oppression a major concern? Those margins and axes being class, sexuality, whether they are disabled or not, are they an indigenous woman, indigenous person, are they trans, those different aspects of our identity. And she later on goes to answer that in this chapter by saying that ultimately the responsibility for caring for each other and for looking out for each other falls on us. We have to continue to build these coalitions of Black women to support each other, because no one sees the value in bringing out search dogs and creating massive campaigns to find Black women and Black girls. She also writes in this chapter that women and children, especially girls as well as LGBTQIA people, continue to face high levels of gender-based violence in the U.S. and around the world. And femicide is a global issue. Again, like I was saying, the Bring Back Our Girls hashtag was it started as an international hashtag, but it is obviously applicable to the current state of the U.S. There are hundreds and hundreds of Black girls missing in DC alone. We saw a lot of articles that came out towards the end of 2019 that was like, okay, so where are these girls? But aside from that, there hasn't been a lot of people keeping track. And how do you keep track of the numerous Black girls that have gone missing elsewhere, across the U.S.? Like, here, I'll share these comments with y'all. But again, the responsibility of caring for each other falls on us. And is this a fair, is this fair, period? Being that so many other groups are, I won't say so many other groups, white women are allowed to rely on the power of the law enforcement to carry each other and to care for one another. White women don't have to look out for each other. They have the law. and the legal system on their side. So is it fair for Black women and Black girls and Indigenous women and Latinx women and those communities in general to have to kind of form these coalitions in order to take care of each other? There's a report and documentary out in Canada now that shows all these Indigenous women dying and disappearing that involves no foul play, but the families are insisting otherwise. Again, yeah. See, that reminds me of Kanika Jenkins and how now, just in the current climate, a lot of people are calling for her case to be reopened because a lot of people suspect foul play. There are some details of her murder that are just extremely sketchy. And just even with a lot of the Black girls that have gone missing, just reading through the numerous reports of Black girls going missing on a day-to-day basis, a lot of times it doesn't make sense. It seems like it's more than, oh, she ran away, or she was in bed and then I woke up and she wasn't there. You know, these cases are not just simple and to the point. Like, there's a lot more that goes on in these cases. And I think about how like, for instance, in the JonBenet case, I'm not sure how old she was, like 5 or 6 or something, but she went to sleep, and then she wakes up. Her parents wake up and she's gone. Her body's found downstairs. And then I think about how a girl of her age, a Black girl or an Indigenous girl of her age, would immediately be called a runaway. A 5 or a 6-year-old would be called a runaway. There would be every type of assumption placed onto this child in order to try and justify or make sense of why she's missing. They really like to enforce the, you must be missing for 48 hours before we can file a missing persons report. It's like, this is a 5-year-old. This is a 5-year-old. My 5-year-old, my 4-year-old, my 5-year-old, my toddler is not out roaming around in anywhere that she's able to fend for herself. So there's a disconnect there, because there have been cases where the little white girls go missing or the white women go missing, and it's just 48 hours suddenly is null and void. It's a crisis, and we are getting Amber Alerts on our phone. Let's find them, so on and so forth. She writes later on in the chapter that trans people in the United States are facing increasing rates of violence as new reports reveal more murders and deaths of trans people than ever previously reported, because of flaws in the way gender is recorded in statistics around violence, and because transphobic families are sometimes reluctant to report a gender identity that differs from the identity assigned at birth. Any numbers are at best a small sample of those who have been lost. Yeah, we see right now with the recent murders that I think Tony McDade, a Black trans man. While this isn't a case of someone going missing per se, this is a case of misgendering. When it was initially reported, it was reported that a Black woman was murdered by police, but it's extremely important to make those distinctions. This was a Black trans man, and in the case of missing Black trans people, there is another level of, I would say, worry that needs to be added to it, because the level of violence against trans people that's happening, it's almost always a hate crime. There's rarely a case of a trans person being, I won't say rarely, but I'll say that in a lot of the cases of trans murders that we're seeing, these trans people are in relationships or, out in public, and they are being directly targeted because of their trans identity. And she goes on in that section to write about Cece McDonald, and she says that Cece was one of the women, Black trans women, who was able to successfully fight off her attackers, even though she sustained a lot of injuries in that situation. But Cece, like she said, is one of the lucky ones. There was one man, I want to say about 3 or 4 days ago, a black trans girl actually Not sure how old she was, but Ayana Dior, she was attacked by a group of straight black men in a gas station because she is a trans girl. And she went on her Facebook page to kind of air this out, and she spoke about how black trans girls go missing and how they are killed. And when their families report, she said she had a friend who was a black trans girl and she was killed, and her body wasn't found for about 5 or 6 months. But the guy that she was dating told her not to tell anyone about them, and she decided to go public, and he had someone murder her. It was a story that you could tell she was pretty familiar with those type of things happening. A lot of her community was black trans girls like her. And just in the case of black trans women going missing, I think that we're not ever going to truly see the number. Because again, as Mickey Kendall is saying, families will either report in a way that doesn't honor their identity, or there won't be a report at all. And they're just lost. So one of the quotes that I highlighted in this section says, currently, many of those who are responsible for the serial victimization of marginalized women likely feel that they have identified the perfect victim pool. So, again, there was a case, I made note of it. There was a case of Khalil Wheeler, who was a black young man, I think early 20s. And he was murdering black women. And in during his trial, he said that he chose this demographic of black women because he knew that no one would look for them. So Kendall was spot on, and she goes on to write, whether they target people with substance abuse issues, homeless people, or sex workers, they know that the chances of those types of people getting as much attention as a cheerleader or a soccer mom are minimal. For a black man to make the clear distinction that he was targeting black women to murder, to rape and then murder, because he knew that no one would search for them, was telling. It was probably honestly, it was extremely scary. He was doing this to young black girls. They were in there. I feel like we keep going back to this conversation about a demographic that no one cares about for abuse. I'm going to the case of Khalil Wheeler to get the exact information, but when I read this section again, that's exactly the story that I was thinking of. And this specific incident was particularly haunting because it was about a young woman who texted him before they met up, and she said, "You're not a serial killer, are you?" He in fact was. And her name was Sarah Butler. She was 20 years old. I wanted to get her age correct, but she was preparing to go back to school after Thanksgiving break. She was home on Tinder or one of the dating apps, and that's how she came across him. She went out to meet him, and that was the last time her family saw her. And he was so unapologetic in his during his trial when he said that he knew no one would look for black girls. He says that his attorney defended him, saying that the victims put themselves in a vulnerable position, further supporting his argument, making everything that Khalil Wheeler was saying even more valid. And it's such a sick statement, but it was true. No one was looking for this black girl except her family. After the fact, months after the fact. Hi, June. Months after the fact, we get a Dateline NBC special, but at this point, it's too late. Sarah's gone, and there's no bringing her back. There's no bringing back the other black women that he murdered, that he callously decided to take from their families because he knew that other than their families, no one would care. So going to the syllabus, I'm going to just put these questions out there. You can feel free to answer them in the comments, and I can come back to them. And I'm going to keep moving on. I'm going to go ahead and move to the second section. As I pose these questions, right, yeah, he says that these black girls, well, his attorney said that the black girls are putting themselves in a vulnerable position. And essentially, I guess that coupled with Khalil's statement just meant that these black girls deciding to honestly do what white girls do. We know what people do. Like, you should be able to get on Tinder and hook up with someone without having to ask them, "Are you gonna kill me?" But for Sarah to ask that and for her to end up dead at the hands of this man is just the eeriest thing. But there was an element, there was a part of me that was like, I'm not surprised. And for him to have that awareness, was there some sort of like cognitive dissonance? Because it just he's aware of this, but that doesn't register as, oh, let me protect black women. Like, I know no one is looking out for black women, but he just decides to, continue to victimize them. But the questions in the syllabus, the first one says, how has the well, I think we already talked about that one, but the other one is, what do we get when we demand accurate accounting of these rates of violence? And according to Kendall, how does respectability play a factor into this section on missing cases of black women by the police and by media? Again, you can just go ahead and put your answers or any other comments relating to this section in the comment section. But for now, we're going to go ahead and move on to fear and feminism. So the fear and feminism chapter follows up missing and missing and murdered. And Kendall kicks off this chapter by telling us about a class encounter that she has with a white girl about the Anita Hill case. So just for context, Anita Hill accused the U.S. Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual assault in 1991, and despite her testimony and the testimony of other witnesses, he was acquitted and he was still confirmed to the Supreme Court. So in this chapter, like I said, she begins by talking about a specific incident where in the course, this white girl decided to chime in and say, why do black women always support black men? And Mickey Kendall, the TA, and another student had to gather her because she was out of line. So she writes, what I remember most about that class was the day a white girl piped up as we were talking about Anita Hill. She asked, why do black women always support black men? She was offended that more black women hadn't acted in what she perceived as a feminist fashion and rallied to support Anita Hill. She ignored, or more likely didn't know, that many black women had rallied behind Hill. What she knew was that all the faces she saw supporting Hill were white women, and for several long, aggravating moments, she attempted to craft a narrative about male privilege and patriarchal attitudes that was completely race-blind. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this question out there. But what sort of scripts or attitudes does this image of the unsupportive or supportive black woman, what types of scripts or attitudes does this image project? So ultimately, this section is about all the Megyn Kellys of the world, the white women who can call out patriarchal behaviors in their white male counterparts or even other men. But there's a disconnect when it comes to women of color and black women. So I say that this section is about all the Megyn Kellys because I felt like that paragraph on Megyn Kelly was kind of spoke to the larger issue that she was talking about in this chapter. She wrote, when Megyn Kelly was being castigated by some of Trump's supporters for daring to ask him about his misogynistic language toward women, there was a push to rally around her to protect this new, brave feminist voice. And the fact that Kelly made her name by the way of the most perplexing casual racism and other Fox News friendly bigotry was suddenly swept away in a tide of one-way sisterhood. So we see this type of thing over and over again where, it's the root of white feminism, where white women are extremely vocal about misogyny, the patriarchy, sexism, all these things that are happen as a result of just being a woman, but they suddenly miss the mark, ignored, don't have the range when it comes to issues of race. And when it's time to discuss the intersections of race and gender, they understand being a woman all day. There's the gender pay gap and the glass ceiling and, like sexual assault at work. But when you call them out and hey, Karen, you know, I'm also a woman, but I'm a black woman. So there's another layer to all the mess. Have Anita Hill been Megyn Kelly? What would that outcome? What would the outcome of that trial have been like? I mean, we know the history of white women and black men. So, what's the likelihood of that trial or that situation having ended the way it did? And to go back to the beginning and to talk about that class interaction, Kendall, one thing that Mickey Kendall says is that the people in the class corrected the girl and let her know that black women were supporting him. But she said, I think it's later that she talks about dehumanization, but definitely for white women or any other group, it's hard to see another person suffering if you don't even value their humanity. Exactly. And this white girl, how are you going to say that black women aren't supporting Anita Hill if you aren't seeking out black women's voices? If your Twitter timeline is not curated in a way that prioritizes black women or, indigenous women or whatever the issue is you want to speak on, how can you say you're accurately or fairly speaking on it? You don't have a reference point. If you are speaking just based on, you're a white woman speaking on a broad range of feminism, but you're only centering white women, that's not a fair representation. It doesn't make sense. So another question posed in the syllabus is, what utility does the idea of black women not supporting Anita Hill offer to structural racism and prejudice? And I think I'll let y'all answer, talk about that as well in the comments. Hi, Natifa. But also, what utility does the idea of black women not supporting Anita Hill offer to structural racism and prejudice? What does it serve white women to discount the efforts of black women? That's what I got from that question. White women are consistently saying, especially, the white feminists, I have to be specific because there is a level of awareness that white women who identify as feminists have. Like I said, they understand the very basic surface level gender issues. Their analysis and understanding doesn't go much further than that. But what do they benefit from being able to discredit and ignore the work of black women, and specifically black feminists who have really contributed so much to these conversations, who have said, we all have to be free. None of us are free until all of us are free. And white women are like, we gonna be okay. White women, we're good. We're gonna look out for us. Y'all got y'all, or do you? So another section in this chapter, all I did was highlight her name, but Miss Abigail Fisher, the girl who went on her rant, I think when she wasn't admitted into like her dream school or something. I don't remember. I was in undergrad. It was just a few years ago, but I was in undergrad when that happened, and I went to a PWI, so I remember having these conversations with people. She wrote that for anyone who doesn't have the book by them, Abigail Fisher. The section on her says, whether it is Abigail Fisher suing to undermine affirmative action or Sheryl Sandberg leaning into Facebook's pandering to all white conspiracy theories. So Abigail Fisher essentially was blaming affirmative action. But in the I guess, over acceptance of Black women and women of color, people of color in general, for her not getting into the school that she felt like she deserved to get into. But we know the fact affirmative action primarily helps white women. But it was hard for Abigail to just accept that she wasn't qualified, I guess. But it spoke to a broader issue of white women's entitlement, white women's inability to accept that other people are intelligent, that other people, mainly Black women, are oftentimes they're I guess equals, if not, but let me go back to my book. She goes on, Mickey Kendall goes on to say that we can't simply pretend that the politics that unfold around the impact of feminism is informed by the greater world. Abigail's response was literally a microcosm of a larger issue. There's a book called When Affirmative Action Was White. I suggest to read. But regardless, affirmative action is something that has greatly benefited white women, again, because of that gendered element. We'll go back to the syllabus for the next question. How do we combat historical revision, which often discredits or fails to account for the work of folks at the margin? Are we in a moment in which we have control of how history is written and told? And then Faduma says, it lets them say, see your own men. Yeah, see your own men don't even support you. It feels like the awful thing that people say when they go, but what about Black on Black crime? It's goofy. But the awful narrative is that if you don't seem to care about each other, then why should anyone else? This is, I think that's the biggest takeaway. If you don't seem to care about each other, then why should anyone else? And I think that in this current moment, I've seen white women doing this even through their supposed allyship. There have been the signs. I saw a sign that said, "Stop killing Black men because I want mixed children." And the caption was, said something like, "Don't take this the wrong way, just showing my support." Something like that. But it really reminded me of how sick white women can be. And I've seen these signs, and I've seen white women at protests holding up like massive Black sex toys and dildos, and it's just like they have positioned themselves in these protest spaces, and they have talked over and co-opted these movements from Black women because they believe that they are doing it better, and they believe that they're quick-witted and their funny punchlines on these posters rallying for Black lives is going to be effective. So yeah, white women ultimately have a stake in feminism. Oh, and I wanted to ask, how I know when a lot of people are introduced to feminism, like when a lot of Black women are introduced to Black feminism, and we begin to read more and learn more and kind of build our knapsack of knowledge, we often take to social media to voice these different opinions that we're coming into. But I guess my question is, just given the context of this chapter, do you think it's important for us to continue to make the distinction that, I'm a Black feminist, or I'm a womanist, or, there are tons of different variations and focal points of feminism, or different issues that have feminist lenses applied to them. But do you feel like it's important for us to continue making those distinctions? If so, why? What purpose does it serve? And if not, why not? Okay, from there, while y'all type in the comments, I'm going to move forward to race, poverty, and politics. Actually, before I do that, before I do that, I'm gonna stay on fear and feminism for another minute. I have a lot of notes and stuff that I wanted to talk about in this chapter. I missed them for a second, but I'm gonna go back. So there was another section where she writes, too often white women decide that when they feel uncomfortable, upset, or threatened, they can turn to the patriarchy for protection because they don't want to lose the protection, dubious as it is. They stand by it when it's convenient and challenge it only when it directly threatens them. Yet they know they benefit from it being challenged and thus rely on others to do the heaviest lifting. They fail to recognize that the conflicted relationship they have with the patriarchy includes a certain cowardice around challenging not only it, but other women who have embraced it. So, again, so while reading so much of this, there were so many quotes and so many passages that reminded me of this current moment that we're in, and just like different things that have been on social media within the last week and a half, and how we have dubbed the white women acting nutty on social media as Karens. And there are a lot of videos that have shown white women, in the name of neighborhood watch, I don't know, just minding other people's business. And this passage in particular has really reminded me, not that I forgot, but it has really shown that white women are so wishy-washy, and I don't believe in a lot in alliance with white women because they are so wishy-washy. They are able to flip-flop between the privilege of their race and the oppression of their gender. And I don't ever know which one they're going to want to cling to on a day-to-day basis, and I would rather not try to, read their mind and see. But it's such a telling statement that white women are willing, even in the name of feminism, to throw other people under the bus. Faduma says, that point about the patriarchy makes me wonder why we insist on the narrative that white women vote against their own interests. Are they ever voting against their own interests? Exactly. No, they're not. White women, I feel like, how there are a lot of black men who try and push the race first narrative on black women. I feel like white women are race first for real. They have an allegiance to their race. Oppression is convenient. Their gender is convenient. It allows them to take up space elsewhere when they aren't allowed to take up space within their race. But at the end of the day, white women are white, and they know what that means. They understand the power in that. She says, there's a certain license to assume that somehow feminism is the province of white women who choose to share it with others instead of the work of all toward equality, if not equity. It's a myth that not only lets them cluck disapprovingly at flaws in communities that they don't belong to, but it also gives them a pass to pretend that their communities are somehow healthier or safer. When white women pathologize the problems in communities of color while ignoring the danger that they face from white male patriarchy, they create a framework where they need people of color, specifically black women, to be perfect representations of a brave feminism that they refuse to embody themselves. Faduma said, LOL, there was recently an article about women in alt-right groups demanding rights. Okie dokie. Wait. See, where was that article for demo? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, I guess, girl, fight for your rights. But she also, let me continue. She said, offended by our focus on our own communities, they cannot fathom that we are dealing with complex situations on our own terms. Hold on. On our own terms. They balk at the idea that we have ownership over ourselves, that whether it is our bodies, our lives, or our children on the line, our priority is protecting whole communities and that we expect them to do the same. Does this mean that women in the hood don't have to challenge patriarchal ideas? Absolutely not. Wait for the move. Alana, we are on Fear and Feminism. Okay, thank you for dropping that link. Yeah, we're on Fair and Feminism, Alana, moving into race, poverty, and politics now. So let me go ahead and get there in my book. So as I said before, rereading these sections really, there was something that spoke to our current movement, um, in each section, or conversations that I've been engaging in within the last week or so. And I feel like this book is extremely important because so much of our current circumstances, specifically things that are impacting Black women, are being exacerbated by the pandemic, and now by this recent, I would say, like surge in protest movements and uprisings across the country. There are a lot of ways that Black women, the different things that affect them, are being hidden. You're welcome. So to start with the syllabus, make sure y'all, if y'all haven't purchased this syllabus, that you get it. It was really helpful as I reread these sections, and the syllabi are very, very helpful for the readings in general. They take a lot of work. We put in a lot of work to get these done and get these out to y'all, and to make sure that they're quality and they're not just a collection of quotes, but we really want to provide y'all with takeaway points and important discussion questions to help you really interrogate the reading. You should always be interrogating what you're reading and adding to your knowledge. But as I was saying, in the race, poverty, and politics section, Faduma has a quote from Fear and Feminism. If white feminism is a weapon, then intersectional feminism is a pressure bandage. It can't heal the wounds, but it can stop the bleeding and give a community a chance to heal on its own. Mm-hmm. My question here is, what's the alternative? I struggle to understand the quote. It's on page 193. Okay, let's go back to that. I'm gonna try and find it because I don't have like I was telling you, I got the ebook. I can search it though, because we have. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I found it. Thank you. Um, Intervention inside communities is often interpersonal. A call, a conversation, sometimes a fight. It's imperfect and messy, but solutions that actually help the community. Yeah, I found it. Thank you. But solutions that actually help the community in the long term are often thin on the ground. If white feminism is a weapon, then intersectional feminism is a pressure bandage. It can't heal the wounds, but it can stop the bleeding and give a community a chance to heal on its own. So you say you struggle to understand the quote. My takeaway from this quote, I feel like it dispels the myth that feminism, or intersectional feminism, is, the end all be all, or an overarching solution. I feel like it's really a temporary means to an end. Excuse me. The point about it being a pressure bandage, and then going on to say that it can't heal the wounds, but it can stop the bleeding. I take that as saying that it's not going to fix all of these issues, because at the end of the day, these issues are reminiscent of structural problems that are really even beyond white women. But it does give people, specifically women of color and Black women, it gives us the chance to better learn ourselves, to better learn how to service our communities, and to begin rebuilding in a way that serves us. Intersectional feminism gives us language, gives us more purpose, gives us direction, but it's not the answer. It doesn't fix everything. Does that make sense? Did I get that right? It's a takeaway that it's a pressure bandage that'll give way to a solution in the long term. In a way, yeah. I don't know if I would even say it's going to give us. Mm, so it says it can stop the bleeding, give a community a chance to heal on its own. So I don't necessarily look at intersectional feminism as even the gateway to a long-term solution. But like I said, I think it gives you a tool kit to get there. And then to speak to the title, the feminism and fear. Feminism that comes from a place of fear that prioritizes not being afraid or not being comfortable over being effective is dangerous. Did that help, Faduma? I don't know if I really answered your question. If anybody has anything more helpful to add to Faduma's question, and more of a comprehensive answer on that quote or interpretation of that quote. Okay. So yeah, we'll go on to race, poverty, and politics. This section, she is speaking about poverty. Not only that, poverty and its relationship to voting, voting access, voting rights, voter suppression, all of these different issues. I was really glad to reread this chapter because, you know, you just that was a really important quote in Fear and Feminism, and I think thanks for bringing that up because I didn't highlight it, but I think it did very well. I think it was a good quote to kind of summarize the chapter. But on race, poverty, and politics, again, I'll take you back to this current movement in social media. We are seeing a lot of people online, say that voting, you see what's going on? Make sure you vote. Come November, make sure y'all show up on November 3rd the way you're showing up to the protests. And, just a lot of people weaponizing voting rights. Really, really trying to, I guess, minimize the structural violence that's happening as a system of issues that can be solved just by voting. And I think that's extremely unfair and extremely dishonest for these issues to be watered down to ballot box issues. We're dealing with structural issues that are at the core of not even just America, our world. Like colonialism, it runs deep. And there's so much that can be changed by voting, but there's a lot that won't be. Sometimes voting is just about, it seems to just be about, how you're going to get killed and not if. So, again, in the syllabus, we have a quote from the very beginning of Race, Poverty, and Politics that says, "Poverty is an apocalypse in slow motion. It's generational, sometimes a personal apocalypse, sometimes one that ruins a whole community. It isn't a single event of biblical proportions, but it is a series of encounters with one or more of the fabled four horsemen." I think this is in the first 2 pages of this chapter, but it's very important for us to not water down race, and the relationship between race and poverty is a series of bad choices and money management problems. I see, and I've even had these conversations with the people in my life, so many Black people that I know personally who, poverty, you got to go get a job. You got to get a 9 to 5. Well, if that 9 to 5 is paying me $7.25, I can only do so much. So, just the immediate acknowledgement here that, as she says, when politicians talk about the working class and the Rust Belt, we can hear that they understand the consequences of long-term poverty. They can grasp it. They can grasp that it isn't a moral failing or a personal failing, but instead the consequences of bad policy and limited opportunity colliding over time. So the politicians, the people at the top, they understand that poverty is another systemic issue. Poverty is not because your daddy didn't manage his money well, or your mom spent too much, da da da. That's not what leads to poverty. Poverty is a long term, predetermined set of circumstances. Of course, if you're born into poverty, you're likely to die still being impoverished. And politicians have only or will only acknowledge poverty as an issue when the people living in poverty are not Black. Other than that, when we start talking about Black people living in poverty, look at this present moment and how Black people in the hood, Black people in these low income areas, I'll say low income areas are that's their language, when they're rioting or looting, as the media is saying. It's you know that apparently that speaks to their entire situation. It's like, look at you, you're rioting, you're looting, no wonder you're poor. But on the other side of town, or right up the street, because poor white people don't live too far off sometimes from poor Black people, or poor white people will have their own area that kind of like mystifies their poverty experience. But Black people in poverty are, I feel like, denigrated even more. That class element definitely nuances the conversation further. She continues to, contribute an analysis of poverty by talking about the relationship between poverty and voting. We are so quick to demonize and call out and question people who don't vote. Why aren't you voting? And did you vote? You're mad, but did you vote? You can't be mad if you didn't vote. But I feel like her explanation and her breakdown of voter suppression and voter rights was so important and easy to digest. And I sent it to a few people because some of the recent conversations I've been having have been, well, what about these people who aren't voting? And I say, well, are you going to talk about voter suppression? It's like, I'm not talking about voter suppression. I'm talking about people who just don't want to vote. Even in that case, that typically is the result of these connected issues. People don't just wake up and they're like, I don't want to vote. There's generally something that led to that conclusion. It's not I'm 18, I have the right to vote now. I'm not gonna go vote. There is a series of events or some type of knowledge that has been gained over time and awareness of their circumstances that leads people to say, I don't want to vote because I don't feel like my vote matters, or whatever the case may be. But she writes, the idea that working class people live there suddenly vanishes despite the city functions relying on those populations. Voter suppression collides with voter disinterest to further disenfranchise the residents. And it's this recipe that lends itself to the political landscape in America and elsewhere, trending further and further to the right, where the belief in bootstrap logic dominates policy, making even in the Democratic Party. Exactly, Alana. Like, we're seeing people lined up for hours after the voting place is supposed to close in Georgia wanting to vote, and they didn't get to vote, and then later on when they're upset about something, it's, but did you vote? I couldn't. I got there at 6 a.m. Or I got there when I ran when I got off my when I got off my job at 4 p.m. But the voting place closed at 6 and the line was already stretched around the corner. I had to stay at work because I only make $7.25 and I need some money. It's just this stacking of circumstances that is unbelievable. Let's see. Fenoma says, right, and there is an additional layer of morals and expectations attached to them, and it doesn't help that some people adapt what I think is a bit of Darwinist survival of the fittest approach. Essentially, people who didn't have to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps yelling down and say, work harder, or the very few exceptional cases being touted as resilient and somehow possessing qualities that needs to be studied and imbued in these other folks who somehow can't pull themselves up, right? And voting is being impacted by curfews. And see, the curfews because of the different protests across the country. And not only that, there are people who are fearful, who are scared to vote right now because of their health and the pandemic. And then it's like, okay, we'll just do the ballots, the mail-in ballots. You know that ballot is not gonna make it in. If it does, it's 1 of 10. Like, it's when those mail-in ballots are such a sketchy situation. So yeah, this section. So on that topic, I wanted to ask you all's opinion on voting, because just in this moment, we're having a lot of these conversations on voting in response to what's going on in the world, in the U.S. We're seeing police defunding. We're seeing people rallying around abolition more, which is really surprising. But it has really, the abolitionist movement, prison and police abolitionist movements are starting to pick up steam more, and it's not just a small cohort of Black women saying, "Are y'all gonna abolish them yet?" There are more people who are starting to see how and why that makes sense. But I'm just curious to know, what is you all's take on voting, especially in regards to the right now, and what in the direction that we're going in right now. And then I also pose the questions that are in the syllabus. Excuse me. How does Kendall's definition of poverty as an ongoing process and not just a singularly catastrophic moment conflict with popular scripts about poverty? And then for Kendall, how does the perception of the Black lower class relate to voter politics? So those are just some questions that y'all can kind of sound off on in the comments, and we don't have a ton of time left. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to education. Found something else. So another section I highlighted. Meanwhile, for voters of color, especially Black women, who are often expected in American politics to save everyone else, there isn't even the pretense in their votes that their votes can actually be cast in their own best interest, or that they might have different ideas of what their interests are than what candidates insist they should be. That specifically, I highlighted that because it just made me think about that moment of Black women bearing a lot of the or people, I would say, trying to force Black women to bear a lot of the responsibility following Trump's election. See what happened when y'all didn't get out and vote, Meanwhile, there was the white women that rallied behind Trump. Remember, like, going back to that feminism section, there was a lot of Black women a lot of white women who went hard for their Republican Party, and who went hard not only for that, but for Trump specifically. And that spoke to so much. Alana says voting is still so important, particularly for local and state elections. I'm also on the flip the Senate train. Okay, for real. And then, so I think she's two more quotes that I wanted to pull from this section. Dehumanization is the first step in justifying voting against the rights of other people. And then, is voting the perfect solution to what ails America? Of course not. But having a vote is having a voice in the way the country is run. And sometimes that voice is the first step for a community moving towards stability and safety. And the right to vote is arguably a pillar of American democracy, but countless Americans face barriers to voting, right? Which was pretty much just the summation of the chapter. But if y'all want to answer those second two questions, if you have the syllabus, they're under the race, poverty, and politics section. But yeah, go ahead and y'all can just continue to talk about that. But I'm going to move on to education. So race before gender, white privilege sees no gender. In education, this section, I feel like I think it's Minneapolis. They just decided, I think it's the university there, as well as some of their elementary schools. I might be wrong, but I want to say some schools in their public school system have decided to take police out of the schools. Minneapolis is apparently, moving towards defunding and replacing the police altogether, which is I can't. So I'm hopeful, but this section, it speaks about criminality and speaking about education. I want to recommend another book if you enjoy this section. It's called Push Out. I believe it's by Monique Morris, but there's a passage in this particular section where she says, for the youth who are pushed out of school and into the juvenile criminal justice systems, their futures are more likely to look like Dion's than like mine or Latoya, who are two people that she spoke about at the beginning of the chapter. And then she goes on to say, this is a feminist and racial justice crisis because the students being pushed out are not only disproportionately students of color, they are increasingly female. And the push out by Monique Morris, I hope I'm getting her name right, but I think the subtitle is like the criminalization of Black girls in schools, and it speaks more to the point that Monique Morris made there. But overall, she's just talking about in school arrests and how Black girls, Black boys, and she also nuances it further by talking about how Black LGBTQIA students, or just LGBTQIA students in general, are criminalized in school. And she says right after the section where she notes that the students who are disproportionately pushed out are girls, she says that although the idea of zero tolerance school discipline policies come from the tough on crime policies of the 1980s and 1990s, its impact wasn't as severe then because students were at least likely to be taught by staff who knew them and their families, staff who recognized their fundamental humanity. And we've gotten away from that. I believe this entire section, leading from about where the paragraph that starts with although the idea. So that's the push out film is about like paired with the push out book. But it says from the paragraph that starts with although up until like the end of the chapter, but like I would say around it ends with like his teacher had no problem with it. That sentence, it really speaks to the issue of criminality and schooling, and like why do we have police in schools? Specifically, why do we have police in these schools that are predominantly Black and Latinx? Like, why are police roaming? Why do we have police in these schools but no guidance counselors? Like, how does that make sense? How can we truthfully say that we have these children's best interest in mind, but we have placed this entity in the school that is prepared to arrest them? Do y'all remember the video? I can't remember how old the girl was or where it happened, but the girl who was flipped in her desk by like a security guard or a school resource officer or something. The Black girl who, she was upset about something. She had attitude. She was kind of, I think she was talking sideways to the teacher. I'm not sure exactly what it was, like the disagreement, but in trying to get her out of the desk or in trying to get her to exit the classroom, she was flipped out of the seat. And it's like that level of violence inflicted on a child, a Black girl. I don't even have words for something like that. But I mean, when that spoke directly to the violence that comes at the intersection of race, class, and gender. You have this low income school and a Black girl, who is got a bad attitude, always talking bad, y'all know, like, and she's upset, and I believe that it takes special teachers and a special awareness to be a teacher or be any type of leader in these schools, because there are issues affecting children of color, Black kids, that cannot and will not be aided or supported by placing police officers in the school. There is no way. There is no way. I don't believe that it contributes to the learning environment. If anything, I feel like it stifles it. Like, how does it feel to know that there's just a police officer roaming the halls? And we already know about the issue of over policing in the neighborhood. You are surrounded by police 24/7. There is no way that has a positive effect on the psyche. There is no way that a black girl or a black boy or just a black child in general can think and function and learn clearly in that type of environment. Alana says the quote, wait, I misspelled my statement. She said, children who aren't seen as children but as beings that need to be disciplined instead of loved and educated. Right, and we really see this with black girls who are, seen even in the school setting as hypersexual and angry. We have the angry black girl stereotype, placed on them. It's just a combination of all these different stereotypes and perceptions that really impact how black girls and black children are taught in general. And then Alana says the quote that really hit home was, quote, the hood isn't a hopeless place, but the obstacles that you can face there very widely based on mundane factors, like whether there's a cop in your school or if you have family who will show up for you early and often. And this chapter links back to the hood doesn't hate smart people. I think it would be really good for us at another time to link those chapters and to put them in conversation, specifically because of that quote right there. She says, she calls out bigoted teachers, and she says bigoted teachers can even mask their mistreatment of students as part of a legitimate strategy for encouraging achievement. I have a baby, but she's an infant. But my little sister is in 3rd grade, and just on a personal level, we were dealing with that exact issue. Her teacher was a white woman who was very racist, and she did a lot of things in the class environment in the name of advancement and I'm trying to think of the term that she used, but it was something about like increased awareness and something that the children needed, but it was racially charged, and it didn't serve any purpose. And we have, not only did we, being me and my mother, see a decline in my sister's performance, but in conversation with other parents, they saw declines in their children's performance. The teacher matters. And when you have these bigoted white teachers, filling these spaces with black kids, the white feminist teachers from the Fear and Feminism chapter, when they become teachers and they go to the low income schools, it's not a good look. We'll go to the syllabus for some more discussion questions. She says the hood isn't a hopeless place, but the obstacles that you can face there, we already read that quote, I'm sorry. But the first question is, how did race, class, gender, and positionalities inform your educational experience? I'm really interested to hear that answer from y'all. And then she says, can you recall instances in which teachers were biased? And how did that bias influence your capacity to learn? Were you ever discouraged to pursue particular opportunities? While y'all type, I could say that growing up, I went to predominantly black schools until my schools were pretty diverse until I got to high school. My high school was predominantly black, but I remember my elementary school, K through 5. For the one says she appreciated the emphasis on the teachers and administration as a source of bullying and racism. I feel like they exacerbate the issues that the kids are already doing. Like, if the kids are bullying each other, the principals and the teachers don't help. They they don't practice any real intervention and de-escalation. They're just like, oh, there goes the police, let's call him. But yeah, my K through 5 school was pretty diverse. But even now, I remember there was an element of like black exceptionalism placed on to me because I was like a black girl from the hood that could read. And I remember being like caught on to read in class, and some of the other black girls in my class, either couldn't read as well or couldn't read at all. And of course, my 5 and 6-year-old mind was like, but now looking back, I feel, I cringe because those girls didn't get the help that they needed. I was just constantly paraded in front of them and, chosen. And I didn't necessarily have issues with them, like in the classroom setting or outside. But now looking back, why weren't y'all teaching them how to read? I even remember there being instances of like parent teacher conferences and talking about it with my friends, and they would get like these little reading pamphlets, but their moms couldn't help them go over work because their moms worked, when they were at work when they got out of school, or things like that. But like I said, my little 5 and 6-year-old mind was like, oh, not only am I the line leader, but I can read. I'm the like top reader in the class. But now, why? I feel like black children are punished for not having the resources that they always need. Rarely does someone come in to fill in the gap. We're often made to be, the responsible for our own the gaps in our education, or whatever the case may be. And there's a thread on Twitter asking do you remember the first black teacher you had? And there was a conversation that ensued that was just about representation and learning, and how being in that learning environment with a teacher that looked like you really impacted your success. And I think that's definitely the case. But yeah, I want to hear from y'all. Like, when was your first black teacher? But can you recall any instances like where you experienced bias from a teacher? What was your school environment like? Like I said, I went to predominantly black or very mixed schools. I'm from Arkansas. Arkansas, for some reason, has a huge Turkish population. So I went to school with a lot of Turkish people, which added a entirely different racial dynamic to things. But I think the last question is really important. Were you ever discouraged to pursue particular opportunities? And then what opportunities were you encouraged to pursue? But Emma says that she works at a place that does a lot of research on mental health and classroom bullying, and the only time they talk about the teacher is bias. There is not a lot of data on this, just a bit of data on bias, which is not always clearly defined. Only time they talk about the teacher is bias. Do you mean like in terms of how like teachers view students? Is that what you mean by bias? And then one more question for this section. According to Kendall, how does the notion of safety differ from school to school based on the demographic of the students and teachers? So we know that safety in predominantly black schools is about keeping the teachers safe from the kids. The white teachers safe from the kids. The white teachers who are there through like Teach for America or something like that. And then in the white schools, it's about keeping the kids safe from the outside, from the school shooters, from, the threats within white schools are external. Within predominantly black schools, the threats attend there. They're enrolled. I'll pull some quotes from this chapter that I highlighted. She said, states spend 5.7. I like numbers. Her putting the numbers to things. A lot of people, they need the statistics, or the proof, the numerical proof, to believe that issues actually exist or are as prevalent as they are. So she writes, states spend $5.7 billion a year on the juvenile justice system, instead of on our schools. On average, American states spend $88,000 to incarcerate a young person, but allot an average of $10,000 to educate them. I don't understand. I mean, honestly, in the context of America and all the things that we already have going on, it makes sense. You know, it makes sense that if we're incarcerating more Black youth than any other demographic, of course we're only going to put a little bit of money towards the education. And then, there's the presence of the school to prison pipeline. Very real. And how we use behavioral issues as a means of pushing children into prison, grooming them early and not actually, I don't know, understanding that a 7-year-old is a baby and that he or she is going to be busy. They're going to be all over the place and not seeing that as some criminal trait on a Black child, but as a trait of exploration on a white child. But these Black babies are being funneled into the prison system, so why would we invest in their education? So Viduma says yes, school climate, which includes bullying, mental health service, presence of police, etc. Rarely do we talk about administration or teacher abuse. Just the occasional mentions of old teachers show signs of preference and bias, even in pre-K, and this impacts development and academic success. There is also some data on discipline disparity, but not a lot of data that reflects the stories told in this chapter. I'm going to read some more from this chapter. For many parents from marginalized communities, the fight to not only keep schools open, but to prevent their children from being criminalized starts as early as preschool. And then what I believe it was in this chapter where she talked about how the Chicago schools were closed, and immediately after all the police department was given funding. Like we're funding police over the education system, and it's not even. It wasn't even it was a matter of equal funding initially, or close funding. Schools will get thousands, and we're giving police departments millions to police and to criminalize and to kill, even in the school setting. Another quote I'll pull from this chapter. I have the book on my phone for the discussion, y'all. But at the end of the chapter, she says, at every turn I was surrounded by Black teachers who saw me not only as someone with potential, but as someone who deserved a second chance. Whatever you may think of the kids you see on those videos of misconduct in school, you should ask yourself, why are they loud? Why are they angry? Where is their safe space? How has feminism empowered them or their communities? Has it helped those girls at all? Because ultimately, the ways that we are failing young women of color will come back to haunt their future and ours. And we're going to use that point to wrap up the discussion. I think that spoke to me again because, we're seeing the different things that Mickey Kendall is talking about in her feminism and the things that other Black feminists have talked about for decades prior playing out right now. It's like, there's nothing new under the sun. And these issues just continue to, I don't even want to say reinvent. We're literally just seeing things repeat. It's not as if these issues are really manifesting in extremely different ways. We're seeing the same issues just repeat themselves over and over again. And namely with Black girls, we need to be just more considerate and more gracious to them, because I know that we see Black girls online and some people's initial response is to wonder why she's so fast or why she's so mad and why she doing this and why she doing that. She's at school to learn. But 9 times out of 10, these girls are not in an environment where any real learning is being encouraged or fostered. They are walking the halls of schools that have police officers that are not only criminalizing them, but most likely sexualizing them, because that's another problem. But we are not taking care of these girls and giving these children the grace that they need. The education system, as it is, needs much more funding. And I hope that as these police departments continue to lose their funding, that we begin to fund these schools more, and that we vet that we vet these teachers more, and we make access to Black children a little bit harder. I feel like everyone has access to Black children in a lot of ways that they shouldn't be able to. Black children are precious, and whether it comes to learning or their home environment, it's gonna take a feminist politic and a feminist ideology to really protect them and ourselves and our community. But on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up. I will see you all again on Friday, on the 12th, for a discussion on the third portion of hood feminism, which is housing, all the way to allies, anger, and accomplices, I believe. Yeah, so the end of the book, we're gonna wrap up, and when we do that, we're going to kind of tie in some chapters and link chapters together and bring the discussion from the previous two discussions all together, and really talk about how hood feminism is a movement more than a moment. It's a movement, and I really, really enjoyed this, and I always enjoy talking to y'all and y'all's dialogue. So I can't wait to do this again on the 12th. Thanks, y'all. I will see you Friday.